Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Robin Camarote with us. Robin is a leadership trainer and executive coach, and she has 20 years of experience in leadership development. And I think she's going to tell us a little bit about maybe going from being the worst manager ever to being one of the most successful managers. Robin has also been a published writer. She writes about leadership for Inc.com, and she's a published author and has been a TEDx speaker as well. Thank you for joining us today, Robin. I'll turn it over to you to give us a little more background of how in the world did you end up doing what you do?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and kind of just have a great conversation with you and with your audience. So, my leadership journey was definitely not a straight line. I think, some people imagine maybe starting off in their career and they make kind of like one decision after another that kind of leads in a logical fashion. And that really was not the case for me. But I got out of college in the late 90s. And I started work with a consulting firm. And one thing I realized right away was that I just loved working. I just really enjoyed being in an office environment. I loved having colleagues. I loved the whole thing. So really from there, I just, I also really just enjoyed engaging with clients. And so the first couple of years of my career would be very kind of traditional management consulting, doing program management, scheduling, communications, that kind of stuff. But over time, what many people might relate to is that, if you do good work, you get kind of rewarded with some new good work, with additional work. And before you know it, you kind of accumulated a little team or maybe kind of like a portfolio of projects. And I made the shift about 10 years in from being an individual contributor to being a manager. And I would love to say that just went smoothly and it's been great ever since, but that was not the case at all. I really struggled. I think where I had been very successful as an individual contributor, I maybe made some assumptions that, I'd been managed. So maybe I thought I knew what it looked like. But for me, stepping into that role was really challenging. And so it took a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, and sadly, some damaged relationships for me to really come to grips with what was going wrong and what I needed to do to really kind of own my own leadership and kind of step into kind of the leader I wanted to be.
So I'm imagining, I know with me, when I became that manager the first time, I just thought, as soon as I get the title, all of a sudden I will have magical powers and I will be a manager. And I remember on, day one, maybe day two, I've told this story before, going out and telling somebody that I needed them to do something and they said no. And I said, well, wait a minute, I'm the boss. You're going to do it because I said you're going to do it. And obviously that didn't go real well, which I think, if I remember correctly, you at some point had about half of your team quit.
Yeah.
So
it was a disaster. It was heartbreaking. I got to tell you. So, yeah. And I would say I love that story, because I think my attitude was this, similar. I was so focused on making my clients happy, making my boss happy, and my team was really secondary. And so I was, very good at issuing instructions, but not really good at listening to their feedback or what they needed. And so over a period of time, people were bringing me things and bringing me concerns, but I was really dismissive. And so it came to a head. There was one Friday afternoon when one after another, 10 of my 20 employees quit. They stopped in my office and they just dropped a single sheet of paper on my desk.
Wow.
And it was a resignation letter. And it was devastating. I was humiliated. I was so angry, and I was just sad and disappointed. But there was that moment where, and of course I got really emotional, and I thought to myself, if I do nothing else in my career, I want to be a good manager. I have to figure this out. And so that really changed. That was a turning point for me where I had to, come back in, of course, issue an apology to everybody and just really start listening. And then doing some of the more traditional things, going to training. I got an executive coach and just immersing myself in all of the great resources, the reading and the literature that's out there on just what leadership could look like. And accepting that it didn't have to look just one way, but over time I could really find my way, my style, and what was going to work for me and for my team.
And I think you just mentioned it. I always try to get people to understand that you were probably a really amazing manager at that point in your career. You just hadn't made the switch to becoming an actual leader and getting people to understand, because I think a lot of people believe that a manager and a leader are one and the same. And managers manage things, people, processes. Leaders actually start to interact with people. So kind of looking back on it, what were some of the key mistakes that you found that you had made that you kind of uncovered as you started to become better?
Yeah, and I love the way you categorize that. I would totally agree that, I think, managers there's an absolutely critical role for them in our organization. So I don't know that there's necessarily one better than the other, but it's kind of like you need to know which mode you're in and what the situation is calling for. So there are absolutely some situations where just, driving process and accountability and results and managing to that is really important. Leadership, I love the way you put it. It's really just engaging with people, understanding where they are, like whether it's where they are in their career, some of the challenges they're facing in whatever project work you're doing, and meeting them where they are, and having some vision or some idea of where you want them to go or where you want to go as a team. Now, I think there can be collaborative processes where you invite people in to be a part of that. I also think there's some situations that just call for you to really kind of explore and have that vision yourself, but the ability to communicate it. So I think some of the things I wasn't doing well at the time was just really, shutting down, not listening, and not understanding how much I really needed to tune in to what they were telling me and kind of what they needed from me.
So you, by far, were not the only person that has went through this transition, right? So why, in today's day and age, with all the reading, YouTube videos, the podcast, and everything that's out there, why do you think so many first-time managers continue to have this experience?
Oh, God. I'd be interested in kind of your take on this as well. I have a hypothesis, and that is that that we have this kind of common, belief that once you get that title, whether it's manager or leader, that you should have it all figured out. And, you might have heard fake it till you make it. There's almost this expectation to kind of show up as that person, maybe before you really have the skills and kind of confidence in your abilities. So one thing is I think people aren't able to really be honest about where they think their gaps might be. And because of that, then they're not really doing the work or asking for help from those around them, in a way that they could or they should, or really taking advantage of those resources. The other reason is I think people are just busy. I think they're just overwhelmed and they're trying to kind of get one thing in front of the another each day. Maybe they're in back-to-back meetings and just don't really feel like they have the time to reflect or to really engage. So to me, it's those two things. It's kind of this inability to really have kind of those honest conversations about where we see our doubts and our gaps and our abilities, and it's just busyness.
And I think the only thing I would add to that, I agree with that. The only thing I would add is that organizations oftentimes, and you said at the very beginning that, if you do a really good job, you get rewarded with a little more responsibility and a little more work. So oftentimes organizations just take who's doing the best job, and when there's an opening in management, all right, they know how to do the job. They'll be a great manager. Let's put them in there, but they don't prepare them. And I think, we're consultants and coaches. You said you got an executive coach at the beginning. I wasn't that smart to do that, so I'd had a lot of learning from failures that I had along the way. But as an organization, if they're well preparing people and kind of getting everybody ready to be that next leader, it will go so much easier. And like I said, I really believed that I would receive magical powers when somebody, told me that I was a manager. Automatically, everybody would respect you, right? And that's just not quite the way it works, is it?
It sure isn't. No. And I think that's, it's a really, it is a great perspective. And I think so many of so many organizations do exactly what you were just talking about. If you are technically competent, that one of the few or the only path to progress in your career is to kind of go through this management or this leadership chain. And so you can understand like why people would be attracted to that, because we will all want to feel like we're growing, we're making progress, we're having more impact. But I think there is kind of simultaneously a need for all of our organizations to ask people, is this what you want? Because it's not for everybody. And you can still have a really high impact career, with, increasing compensation or maybe an increasing title or something, maybe without the leadership and management component, if it's really not what's for you. Because it really kind of takes, I think, a certain personality type to put yourself out there as a leader and a manager and be really good at it.
Absolutely. And, you said personality type. I think probably I didn't go about it in the normal way, and I think a lot of people don't, or I say the normal way. I didn't take an assessment. I didn't do any of those things, but I had to start to learn how I interacted with others and what my personality traits were, and then start to look at how others communicated and then think about how can I communicate better. Because when we become fresh new managers, we don't know any better, and we are just who we are, and we haven't learned maybe that there are different personality traits, and some people I need to have a conversation with about how the weekend was and all of those things before I can get to, hey, where are we at with this project? And then other people, I just need to go right in and say, hey, where are we at with this project? I don't want to take too much time, but give me the bullet points. And when you start to learn that, then you can start to interact better and build a better team. Now, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was kind of the courage to lead differently. And thinking about that and the teams that you built over the years, how did you become confident enough to lead differently maybe than what other colleagues within that company were?
Yeah, it was part of the evolution, I would say. So, I kind of talked about this realization that, there were some things that were very broken, I think, in my approach to leadership. And so over the years, I was able to rebuild that team. And by the time I left that particular organization, there were 40 of us. So I was so proud of being able to kind of rebuild that program and engage. And many, I would say, many of those people, even though we're kind of all in different directions now, we're still very close. I was actually just on a conversation with one of them yesterday. But what happens, like when you build those relationships, to your point, kind of with each individual, but then the group, it opens up opportunities to explore things or maybe take some smart risks in a way that you may not if you didn't really have that solid foundation with the people around you. So leading differently, I think, one, it's just being super tuned into kind of who you are and the strength, and believing that whatever strengths you bring are in fact your superpowers, and there's absolutely nothing to be hidden there. It's really just understanding kind of who you are and what you bring to it, and then having those relationships, like I said, kind of in place so you can explore some new things. But one of the things that I noticed is we talk a lot about employee engagement. So over the years of kind of my time managing and leading, I would see these kind of ebbs and flows in how engaged the team was. And I got really interested in like, why are they totally with me on this thing? And then on this other thing, we're really struggling. Like I feel like I'm just pulling teeth to keep them going. And one of the things I observed is that the more kind of like regimented and kind of process oriented we got with some of our things, people would kind of disconnect. But when we were taking on something new, for a client or kind of internally within our organization, people would light up. So it got me thinking about, could we take a different approach to employee engagement that also benefited our customers and our clients by really setting some big goals? And really kind of thinking about how to bring a whole team into imagining something that may seem impossible, but that would have a tremendous positive impact. So that's kind of where I landed, but I got there after many, many years of building those relationships and also kind of noticing what was going on with employee engagement and trying to think of ways that I could kind of keep everybody involved.
So wait a minute, it took more than a day? I thought maybe you just one day decided that it was going to be great and all of a sudden it was great. So it took years.
Yeah, for me it did.
Now, I am curious, as you made that change, and just from the day that half of your staff quit to building to 40, were there times during that time while you were making that change that you kind of reverted backwards sometimes? Like,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm like, yes.
I think many times people make the assumption that I'm going to read this book and I'm just all of a sudden going to be great at whatever it is. And maybe it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's, a great book. They read it and they're pumped and they're doing everything that's in the book, and they revert backwards, and then they get mad, they get upset, and sometimes they get stuck there. So I'm just curious, your insights on those moments when you reverted backwards and maybe became a bad manager, bad leader again. How did you get yourself out of that?
I think this is such an important question. I'm so glad that you asked this. And I will tell you, this comes up so often in my executive coaching conversations now, because the dynamic you just described happens all the time, is that we know better. And then we assume that, well, I should be perfect. And so one of two things happens. So of course, nobody's perfect. We're all human and we make mistakes. So when those happen, we can either tend to be blaming our environment, like, this new generation of employees just doesn't care, or blah, 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 like whatever. We can be kind of, or this whole industry is upside down right now. Like we can blame the environment, or we can blame ourselves, or sort of some combination. Either way, it's not particularly productive. So what I think is bringing lowering our expectation on ourselves to be perfect. So that's kind of first thing. Just know that we're going to make some mistakes. And then what goes well with that is getting really good at repair. And by that, I mean, like, all right, being able to, as quickly as you possibly can, acknowledge, wait, something went sideways here. This is not what I intended. It may be appropriate to have an apology at that point, but like, hey, how can I get this? I want to get back on the right track here. So that ability to, and I call it repair, but I think it's really kind of go back and just acknowledge that there was a mistake made, and then bring people back into the fix, have them be a part of the solution. I just feel like it's super effective. And you can imagine, like, if you've ever worked with someone who, had some humility and kind of, came to you and just like, hey, I'm just looking for some help here. Like, my experience has been like, employees are on board with that. They want to be a part of it. And so I think, anyway, that I love that you asked that question, because I think so often that is exactly what happens. And then we just either end up beating up ourselves or kind of getting stuck, as you're saying, kind of in this negative spiral.
But wait a minute. I mean, if I'm the manager and I've just been bestowed with these superpowers and I make a mistake and I admit it, that's going to make me a little bit vulnerable to the rest of the team. Is it okay for the leader to be vulnerable with the rest of the team?
Yeah, I think so. And I know the way that you're asking, I suspect you totally agree with this point here. And I know from your past episodes you do. But I mean, I think that I just a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to go sit with the head coach of the Georgetown football team. Amazing person. And one of the mantras that he uses on his team is, you're never, oh yeah, gosh, and I hope I get the quote right, but it's something like, you're strongest in the moment you ask for help. And I thought that was really profound. I mean, especially kind of, I'm not, of course, I had never played football and I'm not familiar with that environment, but, the point was like, when we that our strength comes through our ability to acknowledge mistakes and ask for help, not the opposite.
So I think in your words, you have said in the past, I believe, that it's just as important that a leader shares their doubts and their dreams.
Yeah.
So why is that so important, that we should share not only our dreams, but our doubts or vulnerabilities that we have? Why is that so important to the team?
I think it's because it's how we connect, because it's our humanity. It's being open and putting ourselves out there, and it's being real. So I think people really are attracted to that, just being able to say, hey, like, I'm not sure about this, but I'm really sure that we can figure it out together. So I don't think we certainly can't, as leaders, sit back or close our doors or wring our hands and just worry. Like that's not useful either. But I think we can absolutely say, I'm not, I've never done this before, or we're lacking some information, or something else is happening, but here's what I know we have going for us, and here's how I know we can kind of at least take the first step to get out of it.
So you just made me think of kind of a practical place where this could be used. And I know even I still do this from time to time. So I'll give you the example, and you kind of then overlay how you would handle it. So I sit down with a team in a meeting, and somebody comes up with a new idea. Now, maybe I'm the leader. I've been there for 15 years. This person's only been on the team for 5 years. And I say, that's a really great idea, but we tried that 10 years ago prior to your time, and here's where it went wrong. I don't think it'll work, and we move on. What would be a better way to handle a situation like that would still keep the team and the individual engaged in the process?
Yeah, I think it's a great scenario, and it's probably one that comes up often because, of course, people who are newer to our team don't have all of the context and the history, and that's important. We don't want to be dismissive of all of that. The approach that comes to mind is something that I learned. I very briefly took a class in improv. And if you've ever seen any improv work, you might have heard this or kind of gone to a class, but they use this approach of yes and. So there's a way to, and the idea is that we're building on other people's ideas. So could there be, in that scenario, an approach that says, yes, like you've correctly identified the problem and you're on the right track with part of the solution. We've tried some of this before. So what else? Yes, and like what else might we add to that that's new, that it's appropriate for this context, this moment that we're in right now, benefits from all this learning? Maybe there's some other people around the table that might contribute, help shape that. So I think, in general, we do want to invite people's ideas in, build on them. Now, of course, there are times when, for whatever reason, we're just like, that's not right now, because we just need to move forward. But in most cases, if we have the time and the space to be able to do it, I like the yes and approach.
And I often, in those situations where it's we can't for some reason, or we need to move on, we need to get to something else, I will just be upfront with my team and say, right now, we can't do that. It's not the right time. We need to move on to this bigger issue. Let's park this and come back to it. But the key is, and I just did a video recently about this, the key is that you come back. Listening, we talk a lot about our listening skills, and listening is great, but if you never act on what you hear, people don't, they're like, he listened, but he didn't do anything, right? So we have to act on what it is that we hear, I think is important as well. Now, let's say somebody's listening. They hear all these ideas. Here in a few minutes, we're going to give some ways that they can get in touch with you, but they're bought in and they're ready to go. Do you think they should just walk in tomorrow to the next team meeting they have and completely change everything that they do, every aspect of how they run the meeting, do it all at one time, and try to sustain that? Or do you think it would be better to make small changes along the way? Because I feel like sometimes leaders often think, I got to make this really big change and do it all at one time, and then they fail because it's too much at one time. is a small shift enough to show people that you're starting to make a change? I mean, how do you feel about that, the difference between making small shifts as opposed to just trying to do it all at one time?
Yeah, the Big Bang approach. Well, so I have a couple of thoughts, and they might sound a little competing on this, but I think depending on how the issue you've diagnosed, there may be some things that you just stop immediately or just completely cut out or completely change your ways. If you've had, like, for me, for example, I can't even believe, like, I shudder when I think about this. I used to have staff meetings, and before, like an hour before the staff meeting would happen, I would by hand script out everything I wanted to say. Then people would come to the meeting and I would talk for 30 minutes straight. I would use up all the time. And then at the end, people would stand up and walk out. They did not say one word. I didn't give them any space. So given your analogy, like if I had really taken the time at in that moment to say, wait, like I would have just fully changed that approach. That meetings should be a conversation and nobody should, take all the airtime. However, if you're trying to gradually build some skills and maybe move to maybe a more inclusive or an engaging approach, then yeah. So I think maybe it's like picking a couple of things that feel either that you want to try or that you think you could sustain. Because I think the other thing that our teams react to is, wow, that was such a great meeting. But then, here we are next week and she didn't do the agenda and she just kind of went on and on and on forever, blah, blah, blah. So what's sustainable for you? And maybe kind of what, taking that incremental approach can really work. So I think it might sound like a contradictory answer, but I think depending on the problem you're trying to fix would dictate the kind of the right solution.
That makes sense. And I got to share a funny story. You said about meetings and how they're run. I had a client a few years ago. When I engaged with them, they asked me to come into a few of their meetings, and I went in, and I've never experienced a meeting where what would normally be at least a 45-minute to an hour staff meeting anywhere else, their meetings were 15 minutes. And you went in and they went right down through the items. People were prepared. They were answered. And I couldn't believe how great these meetings were running. I thought, what, amazing employee engagement they have. Later that day, as I was walking around talking to everybody, I realized that they did not have great employee engagement. And quite frankly, a lot of the employees were very, very unhappy. So I'm kind of scratching my head thinking, what is going on here? So I asked the leader, I said, can I come back next week for a staff meeting? And he said, yeah, sure. And staff meeting was at 9:00. So I got there about 8:00. And I went in and he was running around the office going to different people's offices and stuff. And he was talking, delivering papers. And I said, what are you doing? He's like, this is our preparation for the meeting. I said, really? I said, well, explain that to me. He said, I script the entire meeting. He said, I give each person what I want them to say at the right time, and they follow along with the script.
That's hilarious.
And it was very efficient. It just didn't help the employees feel like they were part of it.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny and so time consuming. But he really, really was convinced he had to get the right answer, I guess, that he wanted.
Yep, and that's one way to do it.
Right, for sure.
So I do want to touch on, I understand that you run a workshop that focuses on aligning leadership teams. Can you just touch on that a little bit? And I don't know if you have one scheduled coming up, but when the next one might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, so I do a workshop called the Moonshot Workshop. And the idea is that when we have clarity and we have everybody on the same page working towards the same goal, just our productivity ignites, our engagement ignites, and we really can take off. And what's fun, I think, about the idea of a moonshot is that it gets our wheels turning. It's when innovation happens. It's when we get really resourceful. And the key is that we set a goal so big that there really is no expectation that we actually achieve it. But the reality and the belief is that we're going to get so many other benefits along the way of going, of trying to get to the moon. And, I know it's a very familiar story, but, what NASA would say, of course, they had the moonshot back in the 60s, and all of the math and the innovation and the technology that it took to get them to the moon is now what's going to get us to Mars. And that's pretty amazing. So anyway, so what I believe is that when we can get leadership teams together and get everybody aligned, kind of get them all on the same page, that clarity is really what unlocks that collective action. Where I do quite a bit of work right now with intact leadership teams. And one of the things they often struggle with is, they're focused on their function, their silo. And, there is a leader that gets them together to coordinate and maybe do some handoffs. But for the most part, they're not really working together. Or they have different ideas about the best way to go forward. And so a lot of times I talk to leaders who are just frustrated. They're like, gosh, I see so much potential here, but we're not really capitalizing on it. So that's what the Moonshot Workshop is really intended to do, is just provide an opportunity for everybody to be together, get on the same page, get excited about something, and have that clarity about what they want to do together to move forward.
Awesome. And where can people find out when the next one might be, and how do they get in touch with you if they're interested?
Yeah, well, I would like for people to either reach out via LinkedIn. So the way I do these right now primarily is with intact teams. And so I do them, I just work with leaders directly to talk about what the challenges they're facing, how I might customize it for their team, and then we schedule it according to their availability. Right now, I'm not actually just teaching that as kind of a one-off class, even though I have done that in the past. So I would love for people to either reach out via LinkedIn, or I believe there may be my email address in the show notes that you could also share with folks.
Awesome. So being that you have made this amazing journey from being maybe the worst manager ever to now being an amazing leader, you're published, you are running your own business. For that person that's out there listening right now that feels overwhelmed, unsure, frustrated, and they're not sure what to do next, what little bit of encouragement and first step would you give them that they need to do in order to be able to overcome that and become an amazing leader?
Yeah, I love that. And so I want to just slow down for a moment and really think about this. And I think the first thing I would just say is that I see you. I've been there and I see you. And there are many days where I feel like I'm right back there, wondering what's next, what's my, the right move for me. I think the thing I would say is, one is a mindset. And then maybe the second one's maybe something a little bit more tangible. So the mindset is around believing that you can add value to the team and that you have the capacity and the capability within you right now to be that leader that you dream, that you want to be. So one, I think it's just belief that that's possible for you. I think the second thing is to do some reflection, maybe a short journaling exercise, or maybe just kind of taking a walk and kind of thinking about it, but doing some a self-assessment, kind of where are you right now? And then what does that next step look like? One of the ways I think we get stuck is we see great leaders, or we see something that's, 15, 20 years down the road and it feels unattainable. But we don't have to know every step along that journey to get started. All you have to do is see that one next step. So if you can do kind of an honest assessment just for you, not to share with anyone else, kind of where are you in your leadership? What would be the next logical thing? And then do it.
Awesome. And I'm chuckling in my mind because I do remember a time as well that, so me being a typical man, somebody had suggested that, to do some reflection and to do some journaling. And I kind of thought, journaling, that's not for me.
Right.
I'm not going to do this.
Right.
And then I read 5 more books, and, somewhere in there, I found a questionnaire that this person suggested you take and give to your direct reports and ask them to anonymously fill that out and give back to you so you can see how you are in their eyes. And if you're in that bad manager style and you do that and you ask for anonymous feedback, you have to be prepared for what you're about to receive back, because, there are going to be some things in there that you're going to say, I don't agree with that. They're wrong. And my only point is we also have to remember that when we do a self-assessment, we have to think about what we look like through others' eyes, because sometimes that's not what we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such an important point. And I think we all have blind spots. So we don't see ourselves clearly. In my experience, most people maybe judge themselves more harshly, perhaps, than people do around them. In my case, at times it's been kind of the opposite, where I thought maybe I was doing better than other people. So to that point, as you're doing that self-assessment, and if you feel like you're struggling to kind of really get a handle on where you are in other people's eyes, I think it's okay to ask for feedback, whether you use a formal 360-degree assessment, kind of what you're describing, or just simply invite people in to a one-on-one conversation and be like, hey, look, I'm looking to grow, and I want to just understand kind of like how you perceive me, and making it safe, really assuring them that it's okay for them to share how they really feel.
What? I can't fire them when they give me the wrong answer?
No retribution.
Sorry, I slipped back there for a second. So as we come to a close, we have a little bit of a rapid fire session here at the end that we do with all of our guests. I have 3 questions. The first one is, oftentimes through leadership conversations with business owners, something will come up in that conversation around, you're not going to learn this in school, or I wish they taught this in school. And my question is, if we were able to gather up all the school administrators for elementary, middle school, and high school across the United States, bring them all into a room, and we had an opportunity to only tell them one thing that we think they should be including in a student's career prior to graduation, what would be your piece of advice to them?
Oh my gosh. To narrow it down to one thing, that's tough. I think it's you're part of a system. And to kind of understand and I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, so I shouldn't elaborate on it, but really understanding that you're a part of a system when you're an organization.
Makes sense. Second question, what is that go-to book over the years that you have continually went back to that has helped you through your journey and to become successful?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to say one that is so predictable, and I think you may have even mentioned it, but it's the 7 Habits, in particular because of like where we are in time right now. One of my mantras has just been really focusing on what's within my control, what's within my influence. I talk to my clients about it every day. So yeah, I would say 7 Habits.
Great book. And the last question is, what today is your favorite piece of technology that you find useful in your day-to-day work and life?
Oh my gosh. Well, I am really having a lot of fun with some of the AI and the learning models. The one we've been using a lot recently is Perplexity AI. I don't know if your users are familiar with, or excuse me, your listeners are familiar with it, but it's one that if you need some real reliable data sources for anything that you're writing, it's the great go-to source.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And one more time, your LinkedIn handle.
Yeah, you can find me at just linkedin.com/Robin Camarote.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin, for taking time to spend with us today. It has been a pleasure, and I really hope that I can get you back on another time. And I think there's so much more that we can unpack around leadership. But I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you again for coming.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our back episodes, and don't forget to like us and follow us so that you get alerts for the upcoming episodes that are coming out. Until next time, we appreciate you listening.